TESOL Pop, Season 9, Episode 10. Hello and welcome to TESOL Pop, the mini podcast for busy teachers. My name is Laura, and joining me today to talk about what to prioritise when teaching pronunciation is author and teacher Gemma Archer. In this episode, Gemma talks about the importance of prioritising intelligibility over native likeness and how we can engage our learners in setting realistic goals. We also look at some techniques that you can use to help develop your learners' accuracy in their pronunciation, again moving towards greater intelligibility. Let's join the conversation where I asked Gemma, what should we prioritise when teaching pronunciation?
Yeah, I think that's probably the number one question that I get asked more often now than ever before. What I would say in these circumstances is, what do your students need? Because rather than getting overwhelmed with the sheer amount of resources that are available, start with your students. What is it that they need? What are they struggling with? And the easiest way to do that, of course, is to consider a piece of speech that they're producing for you and using that as a kind of needs analysis to identify any issues that they're struggling with. That could be just observing them in class. It could be asking them to give you a piece of recording of them speaking English, which they email to you or send to you in another way for you to listen to later. But I think it's important that we observe our students or listen to our students in some way and identify where they're struggling and actually target those sounds. Now, that's all very well and good, but for some teachers, that's just not enough to help them get started. So another thing we can consider is what our students' goals are. Where are they headed? What are they going to be using English for? And for me, certainly when I'm teaching, I'm always teaching for a goal of intelligibility, international intelligibility. And that is opposed to more traditional models of native likeness, where teachers or resources would be trying to help students produce a sound or a feature in exact imitation of a native speaker. And we know that that's not necessary anymore. There are very few occasions where that's necessary. So instead, we can consider, what do our students need to be doing with their English? And for the vast majority of them, they will be using English to speak to other international speakers. So again, we can use that as a basis to choose, well, what features are really important for international intelligibility. And certainly one of the most returned to sources on prioritizing for the international English speaker is something like the Lingua Franca Core, which Jennifer Jenkins created back in 2000. So that is a list of features of pronunciation. And these have come from observations and recordings she did over many years. And they were communication between international speakers. And she observed and categorized when they had communication breakdowns. And that kind of formed the basis of this list of what sounds, what features are likely to cause the most communication breakdowns. Let's prioritize these in the classroom so that students get the most, maximum practice time using these features so they can go on to use them and be more intelligible speakers.
That's a brilliant place to start. So you mentioned needs analysis and thinking about what students are working towards and intelligibility, those three kind of key things to consider. I wonder how you navigate this when you're working with students, because students aren't necessarily aware of intelligibility as a goal, or may not even consider the day-to-day scenarios when they'll be using the language. And so there's quite a few heavy marketing messages out there that are still very prevalent that portray this idea that they should sound native-like. And I've been in the situation where students have come to me where I've asked them what their goals are and what they're working towards. And they say they want to sound like a certain person from a certain place. And that feels in misalignment, really, based on what they really need to achieve with the language. I wonder if you have any insights on what we can do in that scenario.
I have lots. So first of all, you're right. The market, the ELT market, the industry, the field of ELT, it's saturated with prestige voices. And what I mean by that are usually L1 native speakers And usually they will be from two places predominantly. And those are southeast of England, what we would typically call an RP speaker, or nowadays more standard Southern British English. And the other is general American English as well. Both of these are really dominate in the materials that students have access to. And because of this, it's really led them to become very familiar with these varieties. And what happens when we become familiar with varieties, they become easier for us to understand and we get more comfortable with them. That means that when we're exposed to anything else, we immediately go, oh, not sure I quite understood that. It takes longer to process a new unfamiliar accent. So students not only have this cognitive effect of prestige model dominance, they also see and hear these types of speakers in all of our media. Netflix, for example, all of these streaming, we can stream programs online. Again, we're often seeing certain voices more than others in the media and the news. Sure, things are changing a little bit, but predominantly they're still only having access to certain voices. So they are really... it's no wonder that they have these preconceived ideas about what they should be sounding like because they're only hearing certain voices. And so I have this problem all the time, this discussion all the time with my students. They come into the classroom, they moan and moan about the English they hear all around them, which they hate. What many of them hate. They say it's ugly. They say they can't understand it because it's so different from what they've heard all along in their textbooks, in their resources, in their classroom audio sets. They've never been accustomed. They've never had to try and understand anything different. So they have this kind of immediate negative response. And I think that's the point where we have to start being explicit with students about why. Why are they having this experience? Why are they having this feeling? Because most of our students are not linguists. They don't, as you said, they don't know this about intelligibility or familiarization with a certain type of English. So we have to say, you find this easier, if we're speaking about standard British English, for instance, you find this easier because you have heard it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years sometimes for students. They've had so much time to get used to it and get comfortable with it. So that when something new comes along, as I've said, it's a very different experience. So they need to be taught this. They need that explicit intervention so that they know that this is something that happens to us when we hear an unfamiliar accent or a variety of English. And it's important also to, at that point, establish that if we're talking about English, although this applies to other languages as well, Arabic, Spanish, just to name a couple, there is no one variety of English that is better than any other. Many students don't know this. They feel that there is a prestige model, that's the best English, associated with prestige speakers, so that's who they should emulate. So they need that explicit instruction that there are many types of English, not just native speaker Englishes, but world Englishes spoken across the globe. None of them are better than any other, but they all have their differences. And that's not a bad thing. That's something that we can accommodate and get used to so that we can be understood and understand others more easily. So I think we as teachers have to provide that intervention if that's not something students understand. And something that my co-author in the book that Robin Walker is my co-author in the book that we've just recently published on the subject. And something that he does, which I've also taken into my own classrooms, is to encourage students to think about their mother tongue and the different varieties in their own mother tongue. How many different accents can you think of? What adjectives would you associate with this accent versus this accent? So they're starting to consider the labels that and the feelings that we associate with certain varieties, and kind of using that as a lead-in to consider that, in English as well. So there are things that we can do to help them with this. And what I see is that students really do benefit from these discussions, and they do start to consider, what they're using English for, what they need to do.
I'd love to spend a little bit of time towards the end of this episode to kind of look at some of the techniques that you've mentioned in your book, in terms of how we can teach pronunciation. So we've identified what to prioritise, we've talked to the students about it, and now we've found this particular sound or this cluster of sounds is problematic for students. It can be so difficult, can't it, to kind of demonstrate, well, this is how the sound's made, or this is a drawing I'm trying to put on the wall, or this is me trying to gesture where the tongue is. Do you have any tips on how we can navigate that to help students to kind of develop specific areas of pronunciation?
What we've done in the book is first of all, we've tried to make the techniques that we're showing super simple, like nothing that requires preparation or very little preparation or resources, because we know if we want teachers to integrate these things into their classrooms, they, especially spontaneously as they pop up, they need to have techniques that they can just roll with immediately and not rely on planning and preparation. So we have tried to go for something simple that can be used as issues arise. And the other thing that we've tried to do a lot is to think about the visual and the exploration of sounds. So and it's funny because looking through the book, I think, God, are people going to get are they going to be like, this type of technique again? Because a lot of it is observing your students' language, collecting words and sounds that they're using, and then using those, student language to highlight a point. Consonants, in comparison to vowels, are easy for us to see. So we can look at our mouths and see, am I doing the right thing with my lips, with my tongue? How open or closed is my jaw? So the mechanics can be addressed easily by, using students' own language where they're mispronouncing things, or encouraging them to look and compare either with you or with another proficient model. Am I doing the same thing? And drawing their awareness to this, allowing them to notice what is changing. And I think we also have to consider, again, why are students making the mistakes that they're making? Because although we've just talked about, the mechanics of producing consonant sound and little techniques that we can insert to draw their attention to how to pronounce these consonants, but the mechanics of the mouth movement are not always the reason behind a student's error. A lot of time. Often, not always, but often, if we are teaching a sound in English that doesn't exist in the student's mother tongue, it may be that they're just not able to perceive the difference between the sounds that you're teaching. And so time can be spent on highlighting these different sounds and actually giving them training and hearing the difference. Now, that could be, for instance, if we talk about vowel sounds, we have a feature in the book we talk about, which is also known to increase intelligibility, is how the length of a vowel changes depending on the sound that follows it. If a vowel is followed by an unvoiced consonant, it's going to have a shorter duration, whereas if it's followed by a voiced consonant, it has a longer duration. In most Englishes, not all of them, not in mine, but in the vast majority of Englishes, this is something that happens and is very salient and helps increase intelligibility. So, for example, if we have the word mat versus the word mad, that final D, that voiced consonant, increases the duration of the vowel. So that's something that we can help students with. We can use a physical gesture to actually demonstrate that lengthening of the vowel. Lots of people love to use elastic bands to show that mat versus mad. So there are gestures that we can use, simple things, to help students visualize and hear at the same time what is going on in English. Small gestures like these, small techniques and tips we've tried to put in the book, but all of them are tied to the features which increase intelligibility.
Gemma, this has been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful tips and insights. To close today's episode, could you tell listeners where can they find your book?
Absolutely. So this is the book here, Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World, which I have completed with my co-author, Robin Walker. It's available, it's published by Oxford University Press, so you can get it from the OUP website. It's also available with most ELT suppliers and available on Amazon. And it's now, I believe, in an ebook format, so you can get it electronically as well.
Wonderful. So links to Gemma and Robin's book will be in the show notes, so you can find that easily, along with other links where you can follow Gemma's work. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer or an idea that you'd like to pitch, then you can contact us via Facebook, Instagram, or the website tcelpop.com. Finally, you can support us by sharing today's episode with your teaching community, by leaving a rating review wherever you listen to the podcast, or by even buying us a coffee at ko-fi.com/tcelpop.